What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and I'm honored to have back on the show our featured presenter for our Tuesday night weekly podcast event, certified clinical trauma professional, certified sex offender treatment provider, licensed professional counselor, founder of Survivor Support and Church Protect, podcast host of his own two podcasts and YouTube channels at Jon K. Uhler, LPC, and at Unmasking the Trans Movement on YouTube, father of three, husband to his high school sweetheart, survivor advocate, professional knapsack and boulder remover, whistleblower, and someone I'm grateful to have on the battlefield with us week after week, Jon Uhler. Last week, Jon continued our deep dive journey into the systems and parts chart, where we dove into the next layers of programming within a survivor system and the related parts to that layer, using Jon's experience working with DID survivors, as well as the IFS model Jon refers to often in our show. And today we are going to be continuing our journey into what to expect in therapy and what to expect with your therapist if you are a survivor. Jon's work is groundbreaking as he is able to educate us on both sides of the abuse spectrum with both his decades of work working with survivors in a therapeutic setting, as well as his incredible work in solitary confinement, working with some of the world's most dangerous predators and sexual deviants. Both ends of the spectrum truly make Jon an authority in his field and in this community, and I could not be more grateful and honored to get to share his decades of work and research with all of you. I encourage you all to go back and listen to our entire series if you haven't been following along, as there are so many amazing episodes that cover a variety of topics that build on each other, including triggers, what to expect from your therapist, systems and parts, the psychology of psychopathy, journaling, removing shame and guilt, and so much more. Jon is a wealth of knowledge, and as usual, we'll be covering a lot in today's episode. So grab a pen and paper as we dive deeper into another amazing episode led by a true leader and hero in our community. Jon, thank you so much for being here again with me today.
Emma, it's good to be back with you.
It's great to have you back. This series has been so neat. Like how I said in the intro, your background working on such polar opposites of the spectrum, being able to understand, work with, and have healing processes with people that have gone through the most extreme trauma. And then on the other hand, working with people that are the predators that are causing the trauma is very fascinating to get to learn from you. So this has been a really cool series. We've covered so many topics, yet they all build on each other. And like I said, you guys, I encourage you guys to go back and listen to those episodes. I have a whole playlist for Jon, so I'll link that in the show notes. But this is going to be a really awesome episode, getting to dive more into the therapy aspect. That way we can understand more these deeper layers. We can understand more the predator aspect, and just really have a very well-rounded conversation around all these topics. So I know you have a great presentation for us per usual today, but I thought if it's okay with you, Jon, that we'd answer an interesting question that we had come up on one of your episodes that may not necessarily apply to everybody, but I think that it'll help out and answer some questions. And I think it could be relatable to some other aspects of health. So if that's okay with you, I'll read you a question and we'll start with the Q&A.
Sure, and I'll try to keep it brief. I've been working on this. So, yeah.
We'll do our best either way.
Okay.
Okay, so we had a really interesting question. Jon, as you were talking about the brain, could you tell me if there is, in your experience, a link between PTSD/DID, which is dissociative identity disorder for people who are new, and epilepsy? And so essentially they're wondering if there's some sort of relationship to PTSD, DID, and epilepsy. And I thought if you knew anything about that, that might be interesting for some people to learn about.
It's an important topic. So a lot of people suffer from seizures, and then the question is, where do those seizures come from? And when a survivor suffers, then it's important also to figure out, okay, what's the origin of that? I will tell the audience, I'm probably safe in saying that the average therapist.
Exactly, yes. And like how you were just saying, a lot of people don't put that together. They just think that it's like a medical condition, and something that they need a diagnosis for, or something that will eventually heal. just from, taking pills, getting some type of Western medicine intervention, and it rarely comes up that somebody can, really internalize what they're going through and genuinely ask themselves, could this be my body remembering something? Could this be an abreaction? It's just not something we're ever taught to think. We're always taught to think, go to the doctor, get a diagnosis, and take a pill, or do whatever the medical intervention is. And I think those things are good. Like they obviously can do a lot of good. They can save lives. I'm not completely just throwing Western medicine out the door. It's not complete with how it looks at the body. It doesn't take into account emotional and spiritual abuse and what that energy does to affect our body, and that there's side effects from those things, and that's why I think your work's so important, because you are able to identify that on such a deep level with people. And you don't push that away, you embrace that, along with your own spirituality. You're able to really tap into all those layers with people and offer every solution that or problem that could possibly exist, instead of just sort of a one size fits all, or just like, slapping a diagnosis on somebody. You're really good with almost not doing that, and just individualizing a protocol for somebody. So I always respect your answers and what you have to say. And I think that was a really cool question. So thank you for answering that. And I know that
Thanks
you
for
have.
whoever submitted it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you to whoever submitted that, and all of you. If any of you listening to have a question, as you're listening, or just something you've always wanted to know, just drop it in the comments, or you guys can feel free. If you don't want to put it publicly, you guys can reach out to us, via email, Twitter. John's website has a contact section that we'll go over later. All the links are in the show notes, but drop us a question if you guys have one. We're really happy to bring it up anonymously, or you guys can go ahead and throw it in the comments down below. We always appreciate your comments and your questions. So we're happy to answer those for you at the beginning of these shows. But John, I know that you had an awesome topic and presentation that you wanted to share today. So I wanted to turn that over to you, and let you get into that part of the show.
Well, I appreciate it. And for those that expected or anticipated us showing the chart again, we will do that, but not quite tonight. So I'll tell people what's the rationale. Uh, it's
There's
not that,
always a rationale.
right? It's not that I don't keep my promises. It's that it occurred to me as we've been talking about parts work. If you're a client, and also if you're a therapist, hopefully this will be helpful. I wish that I had been able to kind of hear and learn what I'm going to share tonight, or on this episode. Sorry, it's nighttime as we're recording this. But I thought it would be helpful because on the chart where we are is, as a matter of fact, I'll bring up the chart. And then you're awfully kind how you're sticking around, but either way, right? If you want to, bless your heart, you've had a long day. So I'm going to bring up
Ew. You kidding?
any moment. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to bring up the chart to give the rationale of what we're going to see tonight. Let me bring this up. Okay, so we've been making our way through this chart. We are down to the kind of that third layer, what I have written here, the subconscious level. And then we're going to, so we still have work to do as far as unpacking what goes on in here. And then we will transition as far as description, what goes on in what I'm calling the repressed parts. IFS calls it firefighter parts. So we're going to get into that middle part. This is what I would say is the most important part. Now, every part is most important. And ultimately, this sounds contradictory, huh? This is the most important part, which are those parts that have the memories that hold the abuse. Quite frankly, a lot of parts hold the abuse, but the young ones are the ones that are going to hold a lot of the difficult abuse. So the middle section here, the red, you can see it kind of in the background there, the unconscious or amnesic roles, that becomes the most important because if you can't get through to these parts, you're not going to get through as a therapist. So this is the group, this is the layer, and these boxes can represent quite a few parts. It inevitably will. Okay, so I'll just say these groups. If you can't get through to these different groups, of parts, then you're not going to be able to, if you're a therapist, let me qualify this. If you're a therapist and you can't get through to these parts, then you're going to have a very difficult time helping resolve the pain. If you're a client, if you can't work with these parts or you find that there's something stopping that, then you will have a difficult time being able to heal and bring resolution. So we're going from the blue into the red. So what I thought would be helpful is before we get to the red, I wanted to show as far as over time, because we're going to go from the top downward. I thought it would be helpful to see how this works in process, in practice, as it were. So I'll get out of this and now I'll do I created a PowerPoint. And so this is going to look like, or look at, sorry.
You always have the best presentations.
Oh, you're too kind. Okay. So what we have in front of us is a blank PowerPoint. No, but what we're going to do now is we're going to look at what is the process of therapy? What are the stages? There's actually stages. So if I'm talking to a therapist, I'm going to help them kind of see the flow and see what they can anticipate and the different kind of work that's going to be done in stages. And for those of you that are clients or those of you that are thinking about therapy, what goes on in there? What happens? What can you anticipate? So we're going to look at what you can anticipate from beginning to end. Now, there's a lot of stuff, and it's going to take a few weeks to really unpack this, but you'll at least then know, okay, what is therapy all about? What can I anticipate? And therefore you can have realistic expectations, and you'll also be able to anticipate for the therapist, you'll be able to anticipate for the client, you'll be able to anticipate the predictable times when, shall we say, a part is going to start to put the brakes on. And there are various stages and various predictable places within each stage where that might happen. And where is it when we think of the firefighters, according to IFS, when we think of those parts in the red box, what stage are you going to encounter those? And we're going to look at that. Okay, so I thought I'd start from the beginning, and I didn't have time to get all the transitions set up, so we'll do it the old-fashioned way. This is PowerPoint. So we're going to look at the stages of therapy, and I thought, let's start from the very beginning. We've reviewed this in the past. I would go back and start with the very first episode that Emma and I did. This is really having to do with the question, what would bring somebody into therapy? So let's look at a few things that if you're relating with to these, then you may very well be ready for therapy. Okay. So these would be some of the things that will bring somebody into therapy. A relatively small or unusual precipitating event. So let me break that down. A relatively small precipitating event. You may be wondering, so a lot of people experience life going on, and then all of a sudden something that normally used to be able to be manageable all of a sudden becomes unmanageable, or it throws them over the edge, so to speak, or something out of the ordinary. Now, this can also be anticipated, but still unexpected. How about when the children leave home? A lot of times then that will be enough. Why? Because that'll be enough to start to trigger some things, because now the parent doesn't have to be on point. So it does surprise a lot of women that it's not a sexist thing. It's just the reality. Oftentimes women are taking care of the kids, that once they don't have to do that anymore, what happens? They can start to decompress. And that act of not having to be on point can oftentimes, now the body keeps the score, suddenly it's like coming out of war. So the PTSD symptoms will come up, and they aren't distracting themselves from having to be compulsively busy. So before you know it, something that seems, they'll feel like, why am I not able to handle what I normally can handle? So I threw that in there just to normalize that. If you feel like, you know what, something's strange about me. Why is it that I can't handle this anymore? I must be losing my mind or weak. Okay, let's do that one. Oh, sorry. Okay. So, then more than two ways to handle a PowerPoint. Okay. So life becomes unmanageable. Has life become unmanageable? Right? Does that automatically mean you need to do therapy? No. But if that's resonating with you, then you know, because if anybody is able to handle a lot, juggle a lot, keep a lot of balls and plates spinning and multitasking, it is a survivor. And all of a sudden, life is becoming unmanageable, life becoming unbearable. Okay, again, very similar that what you used to handle, you can't, it seems like you can't handle it anymore. Um, and maybe even psychic pain, so to speak. Things are just bothering you more. Okay. Buttons and triggers and compulsions have become too much to ignore. That's a pretty important sign. That's a good sign, not a good sign, but that's a pretty classic indicator that something is going on. So you're becoming, if you have buttons and triggers, you are, well, I call emotionally reactive. That comes from Murray Bowen. And compulsions, the word means with power, something is acting on you with power, the greater pain wins out. So eating, drinking, snorting, or sex, drugs, rock and roll, something, shopping. So you're reactive and you find yourself that you're not able to control certain things. By the way, religion or religiosity and work and exercise also can be compulsions. Okay, what also are some indicators? Increased depression, anxiety, and panic attacks. We've looked at that in the past. So if those are starting to increase, depression, if that would be getting worse, if anxiety is increasing all the way to panic attacks, then that can be an indicator. Again, what is going to cause someone to go into therapy? These can be the things. The more of these, you can imagine why somebody would now think about the possibility of therapy. Intrusive flashes of traumatic events. Are you seeing something in front of your eyes that nobody else is seeing? Suddenly you're seeing red, you're seeing a face, you're seeing, um, you're seeing body parts, you're seeing just a lot of things that are very disconcerting. And you do a double take or you blink or you rub your eyes and right, you're not sure what that was. So, okay. Sorry, increased, let me bring that down, increased intrusive thoughts. Okay. Um, right. Are you starting to notice that before you know it, it's like you thought it was just self-talk, but now it's like this internal dialogue. And we've talked about that before, but you may have chalked it off to, and this is a psychological term, intrusive thoughts, meaning you don't want them. They're breaking in to your thought life and they're increasing and you're having a hard time ignoring them. Okay, this is an important one, of course. Increased self-destructive decisions. Interesting. So are you doing things that are causing you problems and they are destructive? Shopping, sex, so relationship. How about this? It would really be a mood altering. So that's why somebody's doing something which is self-anesthetizing. So if you are in pain, if you're in emotional pain, we're not designed to be in emotional pain. So you will look for relief. It makes you normal. Now the question is, what are you going to choose to try to find relief? If you can't find relief, you're going to do something to alter your mood. You're going to go for one of three things: a mood altering substance, and food is the substance. Activity, drug, sex, rock and roll, there's a substance. So shopping, just anything, or a relationship. So mood altering. So all three of those will alter the mood. They'll get dopamine going. Also serotonin, right? It'll calm down depending upon what you're doing. So you're looking for relief from what you're feeling. So there'll be an increased something to do with mood altering, and a lot of that can be self-destructive decisions. Nightmares, okay? Nightmares becoming too real, too frequent, I'm sorry, too frequent, too familiar, and too real. You've had nightmares in the past, but these are different now, or they're coming more frequently, or they're seemingly too real and too familiar. That's an important thing. We've covered in the past that memories can actually come up in the form of nightmare or dreams, which we would call nightmare, quite frankly. Okay. Increased drivenness to investigate things pertaining to abuse and trafficking. I added that because I've had a few clients recently, and it's probably always been the case. I now am more mindful of that at some point in time in these clients' lives, they mentioned they found themselves, they call it going down the rabbit hole. They just felt compelled. They couldn't stop just looking up different stories about church abuse or what perpetrators do, or they learn about adrenochrome and they start investigating that. And before you know it, there's something that's driving them. And they almost can't not look into that. They find they're bringing that up to other people. People are beginning to get bothered with them, or it's almost like a fixation. Okay, that's something to take note of. Okay, increased self-injurious behaviors, that is self-evident, but whatever somebody might do, that is going to cause injury. If you have an eating disorder, we could say that laxatives are self-injurious because you can die from that. It'll affect electrolytes. Oftentimes it's going to be cutting, it's going to be burning, but cutting is the most typical. Why? Because it's easier to quickly find an object. The deeper and the greater the pain, the deeper it is, basically, the greater the pain. Again, the greater pain wins out. So if somebody does self-injurious behavior that's different than scratching, right? It's on a scale of 1 to 10. I should put it that way. The deeper it is, the person is doing it. While they're doing it, they are dissociated. And that's why I'm concerned, or always have been concerned, about the quote unquote trans movement, because there's taking people, oftentimes now it's women, with the discomfort with one's body. It used to be boys. Now, how did we get so many girls, quote unquote, transitioning? Well, if you have been raped as a kid, right? Most kids who are raped, who are molested, will assume on some level that if they weren't their same sex or gender, then it wouldn't happen. So girls will say, I hate being a girl, I wish I was a boy. Now that is being reframed as gender-related issues, when in fact, for any mandated reporter, that should be the first thing you think of, that this child is being molested. And then if there are parts, people can have parts of the opposite sex. So girls will have parts, females will have male parts. So if a male part comes out and it sees that on his body, on the body, there are breasts. What is that male possibly going to do? Well, not identify with that and want to get rid of those. So that's how sick this is, when they're taking wounded young people, young adults, and doing what with them? Giving them double mastectomies, because that's cosmetic surgery, but it's radical, and there's no external surgery that's going to help internal pain. So it is just sick, and diabolical doctors are profiting off of this, and then it also sets kids up to be more easily targeted by sexual predators. So that is my concern. So we don't help anybody by chopping off body parts, okay, as far as their sex organs. And sorry about that term, but that's the reality. Okay, there it is, increased lapse of time and awareness. So again, what tends to bring somebody into therapy, the more of these they experience, and if you are experiencing these, then I would suggest consider finding somebody that works with trauma, and especially somebody that's familiar with parts. Okay, so if you notice that lapses of time and also your awareness is getting more segmented, and greater lapses of time, as well as you can't remember what happened in the past, and let's say with your childhood, that oftentimes, along with all these, if you have enough of these, that can be enough to finally cause someone to think about entering into therapy. There we go. Oh, we're at the last one. So let me get it out of, there we go. Internal voices, visual images, scenes, and scenarios. Technically, those are called hallucinations. they become increasingly pronounced. Now, let me qualify and let me give it a different term because nobody wants to have hallucinations. Okay, that's really in the medical field, that's how they call them. Now, let me tell you the difference between a hallucination versus you seeing something on the inside. Okay, a hallucination is something's going wrong with your brain, whether through dehydration. If anybody's familiar with what Looney Tunes cartoons, there's a time where Bugs Bunny is going through the desert and he sees a mirage. I don't know if anybody remembers that, right? You see a mirage. As a matter of fact, if you drive down a desert highway, just thought there's a song like that. Okay. But let's say you're driving in a desert along, let's say toward, well, I'm from California. So let's say you go through Las Vegas or Arizona. As you look off into the distance, what does it look like? It's way out there on the highway or the pavement. Looks like water. And so that would be technically a mirage. So you're seeing something that isn't there. So there's a couple different reasons for that. It could be physical, but if you've been through trauma and you end up with parts, the greater the degree of trauma, then you will not only hear those parts, but you actually might see them because they are on the inside. So it will match the degree of trauma and pain and compartmentalization of these parts. So, as a matter of fact, the original movie, the movie Sybil, yeah, I've never seen I need to take time to watch the remake of it, but the original one with Sally Fields did an excellent job. It compresses, in a way, these different experiences and stages. But there's a scene where she looks around. It's like she's in an attic and she's looking around. She sees different people. She sees kids and she sees teenagers and she sees an older woman. Those are her parts, and she's actually seeing them. As a matter of fact, there's another scene where she is window shopping and she looks into the window. You see the reflection, and there's two of her, but there's two girls talking to one another, two sisters almost. So she can see those parts. So that is, if you tell a medical professional that you see things, they're going to say, well, you're hallucinating, but it's not, because again, it's on the inside. But if there are flashes, we already talked a little bit about that. It may be that they're releasing parts of memories. But if you see parts that are talking to you, and that would also be the internal voices, it's really not hallucinations. Okay, you're seeing what's going on the inside, and it's a very real phenomenon. You may also see scenes and scenarios. So that would be a little bit more than if you just see, what do we call that up there? Flashes. Right now it's no longer flashes, but you're almost seeing scenes play out. So now it's just not a single frame, freeze frame. Now you're seeing the film or parts of the film. And those are starting to become more pronounced. Those are typically a cluster of things, or the indicators that are going to bring someone into therapy or cause them to think about therapy. So if you're at that point, I recommend give it some consideration and to find somebody that works well. If you can't find anybody, you can reach out to me. And if I have room in my schedule, I'd be more than happy to work with you. That's not a promo, that's just letting you know there are resources out there. Okay, the process of therapy has stages. And so I'm going to now reveal those stages. It's not, it's not unique to me. This is actually, most therapists are familiar with this. If I can, let me see if we're going to do this. We'll just cut. There we are. Okay, now, without us reading the first one. Okay, look up here. We've got beginning, middle, and final. So it's like, John, I was waiting for something significant. Don't worry, we'll get there. But there's going to be 3 stages, as it were. Okay, and you're going to experience, and we're going to begin to look at, you can see over in the thumbnails, right? And then we're going to begin to go into these. You're going to find that there's certain things that happen at the beginning that will, in a way, almost need to take place, that are very predictable. before you can move into what's called the working stage, or where a lot of the work is done. Actually, the vast majority of the real healing work is done in the middle stage. And then you have the final stage, and that's going to be where a lot of the resolution happens. Okay, so in each of these, there are predictable things. Now, the question is, how long can all this take place? There's a brief answer. It all depends, right? Um, I don't think it has to be 25 years, and I know it doesn't. Okay. Now, is it going to be a year? Probably not. A couple of years, I think, is what you can anticipate. It just depends. It depends upon what? Depends upon, I'll just put it this way, it depends upon what you're ready for and how hard you're ready to work. Now, let me qualify that you statement, because I just said depends upon how hard you are ready to work. Okay, if you're working with a competent therapist, then I would say this: he or she understands all this intuitively and practically because of their years of working with people, and they're able to work with you as fast and as hard as you want to work. So the progress, think of it like a football field. We'll put down where the beginning stage, the B, this is your end zone, and you want to go down the field across the 50 to the end zone. You want to score a touchdown. Okay, so the kickoff is going to start you at the beginning, and now you're going to work through maybe the 20-yard line, or maybe the 25, 30, the 40, 50. That's not bad, huh? Right. And then it's going to change. The momentum will change. The different things you can experience or anticipate midfield versus here. Even using a sports analogy, I would imagine with hockey or basketball, with soccer, it's kind of wherever you are in the field, kind of a different thing. So you want to move the ball downfield. So in the beginning stages, you're going to anticipate there's going to be things that are very predictable. So if I'm talking to a therapist, here's what you can anticipate. If I'm talking to someone that's thinking about doing therapy or has been in therapy for a while, now it depends upon how long, you're going to be able to kind of see where you are. And the good news is you can move this as quickly as you want to. The bad news is it's going to take time, and there's a balance. But the one thing that really can happen is a part of you can put the brakes on. So you potentially could be in the beginning, but let's call it then the early stages. There are some people that are in the early stages, and they're right in here for 8 years or longer, even longer, 25 years, and they never get across. And there will be reasons why. You don't have to. Okay. It's really up to the client. If you've got a competent therapist, then it's not up to the therapist, right? I view our role kind of as the coach. Okay, so if you have a competent therapist, it's like having a good head coach, but you're on the field. And the question is, are you moving the ball down the field? Are you willing to do whatever it takes? And if you're willing to, then you can move in a very kind of a predictable pace in a way. Now, it doesn't mean you won't get stuck in the mud a little bit. Think about football and it rains and you get rugby or something, but there will inevitably be forward movement. You may get pushed back a little bit, but it's always going to be moving forward. The only thing that will stop it is either a therapist that doesn't know what he or she is doing, or a client who decides to put the brakes on. Okay. And if you put the brakes on, if you got the parking brake on, or if you're a ship and you've thrown the anchor overboard, now it's just going to grind to a halt. If that's going on, then it doesn't mean shame on you. It just means this, that you hold the key. And there's a couple things you can begin to look at. Okay. So let's begin to look at what happens in the early stage that can either enhance or slow things down. So the first would be, and this is very predictable, all these are predictable, it's going to be ambivalence. Why? Because you've either never done this before, and ambivalence is kind of like, well, I'm not really sure. Okay, so that makes you very normal, by the way. Or you've done therapy before, and this is not your first time around. I had a client say, this ain't my first rodeo. Okay. that matters because now the question is what happened previously? Whether good, bad, or indifferent, something happened. So that does matter because now you're bringing to this new therapeutic situation some past. It doesn't necessarily mean baggage, but what happened if the therapist was doing fine and a party put the brakes on and you decided to stop and now you found a new therapist? Well, it's probably going to revisit that dynamic. It's going to be carried into this new relationship. What happens if the therapist had to stop therapy? Well, now a part of you has a number of issues and it's not your fault. We've got some loss. We've got wondering, you know what? I was opening up and then this person stopped or had to stop, or how about if they died? There's a lot of issues with that. Okay, especially if you have MK Ultra and SRA, primarily SRA, okay, because of a sense of foreboding. So what happened if you got to a point where how about if a therapist didn't understand trauma? And so you've been working, here's the cursor, right? I'm thinking of a previous counseling situation. You were starting out fine, and then all of a sudden, because maybe part of it was effective, cognitive behavioral therapy or behavioral therapy, because all of these will be important. So let's say it actually started to dislodge and unlock something, and up comes now some of the indicators of trauma. But now the therapist is not a trauma therapist or not trauma informed or isn't inclined to think in terms of trauma or doesn't believe it. What's going to happen? Well, they're going to bring to bear still their perspective, their therapeutic approach. And now it's sort of outlived its usefulness. And so at that point, but how do you tell a therapist that they've outlived their, and some of you have, right? And you know what? You need to be empowered. If you're a client, you need at any point in time to be able to tell the therapist, I think I'd like to put a little bit of a break on it, or I think that maybe we've gone as far as we can go at this point. So it's okay. You don't necessarily have to, if they want to know, well, what's happened, you can say, you know what? I just think for now, maybe it's a good time to put things on hold. If I would like to sign up, I will. Thank you for helping me up to this point. You're not obligated, right? Sometimes a therapist may be effective for a certain period of time. If you are a therapist, what I would encourage you to do is, I think a lot of us sort of have there's no other way to put it. We sort of have a savior complex. Now, we got to be careful with that, meaning we really want to help. And sometimes we don't know what we don't know, and we don't, there can be a lot of things that can cause us to not either want to let a client go or not suggest that they find another therapist that may specialize in a different model. So I just want therapists to be mindful that it is okay and it's ethical and it's actually very important to always look out for the client's best interest. Okay, so if I've reached a point where where I'm feeling frustrated, and that's a really important thing. So there is that self-awareness on the part of the therapist. If I find myself frustrated, it probably is more to do with me. Um, so I need to kind of reflect upon that. Uh, and enough of that, but that's all to say that it's not one size fits all. And so if you've tried therapy in the past, what I'd recommend is if you still see some of these triggers, right, and these different things coming up over on the left-hand side, think about trying it again. The nice thing in this day and age is IFS, right? And again, I'm not with the IFS organization, not that it's an organization. They just have done a really nice job taking the concepts of dissociation and really, by degree, DID, or used to be MPD, and they've reframed it so that it doesn't have stigma. And so they have a lot of therapists now that they are training. So I recommend IFS, Internal Family Systems, which again, to be an IFS therapist, it presupposes you understand trauma. Okay, so you want a trauma-informed therapist that understands complex trauma. Okay, so it's one thing to go through a loss, it's another thing to have gone through some stuff in your childhood that may not have had a chance to be resolved, what are called aversive childhood experiences that are really profound. Okay, so that would be one thing as far as what would cause some ambivalence. That would actually be past negative experiences with the therapist, the stigma. So that can be a big one that can keep somebody from considering therapy even the first time. Like, you know what, I must be weak if there's something wrong with me if I seek out help. There could be stigma if you already tried therapy and it quote unquote didn't work. So the idea of stigma, what I would say is risk believing that it's not so, and go ahead and act in your best interest. So the past negative experiences, don't allow that to color your experience. Think about going to a doctor or any other professional. Just because you have one negative experience, hopefully doesn't mean you're going to say, never again, I'm not going back. You just need to find the one that works for you. Past comments from others or from churches, right? So unfortunately, that can put others also can be family. So those can be big things that can hinder someone from even starting therapy or start and then stop, because what are others going to say? If you go to a church that basically views emotions as part of the fall week, that the only emotion you should experience is happy, happy, then you know what, you're in the wrong church, quite frankly, because they cannot adequately exposit the scriptures. They can't. How can I tell that? Just ask the pastor or elders, but go to the pastor and ask, our imprecatory prayers for today, are they still applicable? That's half the book of Psalms. An imprecatory prayer essentially says, Lord, you know what they've done to me, get them. Okay, 46% of the book of Psalms. If they say, well, no, it was for a time, then you're dealing with the church where a pastor doesn't understand. Also, the issue of forgiveness. If they say that you need to forgive someone no matter what, even if the person isn't remorseful or contrite, you're dealing with the church that is not going to be helpful and they don't understand. Plus, then they can't even interpret or exposit the story of Joseph in the Old Testament. How can I say that? Go to SurvivorSupport.net under the podcast tab, and I've got about 30 episodes thus far on the subject of forgiveness, what it is versus what it is not. A fear of being diagnosed as crazy, that's a legitimate one, given this day and age of mental health and diagnosing and the way therapists are trained, that unfortunately we are trained that any quote unquote abnormal behavior, anything that's outside the norm, especially if somebody hears voices, that that's delusional or that's psychotic. They're having a psychotic break. And so understandably, who wants to be diagnosed as that? So that's why you want a trauma-informed therapist, by the way. So that's a legitimate fear, but don't let that keep you from going to somebody. Find a trauma-informed therapist who's not going to diagnose you as schizophrenic or with a psychotic disorder. Okay. Fear of hospitalization. Why is that a legitimate issue? Because if therapy is effective and if you have been through severe trauma, you will reach a point, actually a number of points through some of these different stages where you will feel like killing yourself. You will become suicidal. Now, let me qualify that before I get myself or anybody else in trouble. If someone is suicidal, do they need to be hospitalized? Absolutely. Okay. If someone is actively suicidal, that's the difference. Is it legitimate to get to a point where you say, I'd rather die than keep going? Yeah. Does it mean you're suicidal? No. It just means you're being really honest. If you're going through the dark night of the soul, you will be suicidal. Now, does it mean you're going to act upon it? No. Does it mean that you will have those thoughts? 100%, because you're normal. Who wants to continue in pain? But the greatest act of faith is to continue. So you want to be able to have a relationship with the therapist. You want to be able to have a therapist who isn't going to freak out. Now, again, let me qualify this. You want a therapist that's not going to freak out if you say, I feel like killing myself. Okay. Now, a therapist has a duty to warn, a duty to help make sure you're safe. Okay. And everybody understands that. So a duty to report. But there's a balance, because if a client can't feel safe to be raw and real and say they're emotionally bleeding, so to speak, then they can't deal with raw pain. So they need to be able to have somebody sitting in their pain with them. Job said, I wish I'd never been born, and I curse the day that my mother gave birth. Okay, so what does that mean? Should he be, in California it was 5150, in Pennsylvania 302, meaning involuntary admission? No. Now, the therapist has an obligation, of course, if there's a specific plan, if there's a means, right? If it's clear that the person is going to leave the office and literally go kill themselves, then of course we need to intervene. Why? Because the person isn't thinking clearly. It doesn't mean they're crazy. It just means they can't see anything beyond this. They can't see it getting better. But there has to be enough room afforded a client to where they can speak in raw terms without the therapist picking up a phone and calling someone, having them hospitalized, because that actually can be extremely traumatizing. Okay, if you're familiar with what happens in there. Now, what a happy medium can be a no suicide contract. So also to those of you that are clients, here's what I would recommend. Be mindful of the words that come out of your mouth as well. Okay, so remember that the therapist is mandated by law. And so the therapist is running a risk. If they're going to give you latitude to be very real, then they're running the risk of being looked as though they are unethical or irresponsible because they're not reporting that. So maybe qualify some of the statements. You can say, you know what, you don't have to worry. I'm not going to harm myself. I don't have a plan, but I wish I were dead. I just want to die. Okay. So that way the therapist can relax as far as any sort of liability, because they can lose their license. They can be, in some cases, they could be certainly civilly liable, if not maybe even prosecuted, but they can lose their license, lose their business, lose their job. Okay. So there's a balance with that. But it's understandable how the fear of hospitalization. So if you have a therapist that at the very first sound that, that a therapist, the client utters that feel like I want to die, if the therapist is going to suddenly pick up the phone, then that's going to inhibit. But that's a real fear. So that would be something, I'd recommend talking to that. It sounds awkward, but that might be a very good thing to ask the um, therapist, what is your policy? And how can, if I get to a point where I feel like dying, but I'm not going to die, how can I specify that with you? As a matter of fact, I had a client recently, it's kind of a different thing. How about mandated reporter as far as reporting a perpetrator? That's a very tricky one, because in this case, her ex-husband perpetrated. The kids are now in their 30s. They were perped on when they were very small. She's seeking help because she has all sorts of guilt because she found out too late that they were perped on. She thought she was able to protect her kids. And now she bears all this guilt, and she wants to be able to get help for herself and her kids. Now, of course, her kids, being adults, they're going to have to seek out therapy. They're going to have to initiate that. But the question is, how can she discuss what happened if she feels I was going to have to pick up the phone and call the police? So as far as mandated reporting, as long as the child is not in imminent danger, you don't have to, a therapist doesn't have to call the police. If you're an adult, then unless a child is in danger, again, you don't have to call. The goal, or a goal, could be for the client to become empowered enough to be able to consider, if not pursue, civil and or criminal penalties against a perpetrator. I've had one client that actually has done that. And but again, you have to confront. So confronting or If you're going to start any sort of civil or criminal charges, you're going to end up having to confront. You want to make sure you confront out of your healing. Where would that be? Out here, right? The latter stages. Okay. Do not do any sort of action against the perpetrator in terms of making them pay until you're in the latter stages, by the way. So you want to confront or take action like that out of your healing rather than out of your hurt. Okay, fear of finding out that the voices are real. And that speaks to, and it kind of spoke to the precipitating events. That is a huge fear. And that is what is going to inevitably be an issue on the inside when you start therapy. So that's going to be what I call one of the blockages or hindrances that is inevitable in the beginning stages. And that will be a crucial thing to work through. Okay, that's actually, I'm going to address that here at the beginning. If we could, I'll go for about another half hour, so I don't want to burn out my audience here tonight or on this recording. Okay, so a big challenge at the beginning stage of therapy is what happens if you find out that the internal voices that you are hearing are actually not your imagination, are actually real. So that's actually a key thing you're going to be working through. But that can be down deep inside, right? That can keep somebody from seeking therapy, or that can cause them from stopping or just really putting the brakes on. And I've seen that time and time again. Here's another one: fear of the meaning and implications of what may underlie the symptoms. So over on the left were a lot of the symptoms. And there's a part of you that senses, wait a second, where there's smoke, there's fire kind of thing. Okay, there's a lot of power there, meaning a lot of intensity, and it may come from somewhere. So starting to find out, or the fear that, okay, 2 + 2 may equal 4. So that can cause someone to either never start therapy or kind of be putting the brakes on, start, but then starting to put the brakes on in here. Why? Because as more starts to come up, 2 + 2 + 2 + 2 starts to add up. Okay, and then sense of being disloyal or disobedient by disclosing. That can be disobedient or disloyal to family of origin, especially maybe mom or dad or stepmom, stepdad, or the group or the organization or the handlers or those that were abusing. The cult leader. Okay, so fear of that, a sense of being disloyal, can cause someone to put the brakes on. Okay, let me see if now I'm gonna see if I can do the slideshow. I was able to do that before, but let's see. If, oh, from the beginning. How about from current slide? Okay, there we go. A little bit of wow factor.
There we go.
Okay,
It's even
thank
bigger
you
now.
very much. Okay, so we're going to go to hopefully the next slide. Ah, there we are. Okay, we're going to build. So there's going to be different things. There's going to be multiple things that will, pardon the pun there. It's going to be multiple things that happen in the beginning stages. And I would actually put this really in the beginning of the beginning stages. The first thing that you're probably going to notice if you enter therapy, or whether you've been in therapy for, let's say you were in therapy for 25 years, or I know somebody, I'm working with somebody right now, 15 years of previous therapy with probably 2 or 3 previous therapists. One was a intensive day treatment for about 9 months. But what I've had to kind of share with her is all that time, and it's not anything about her, bless her heart. She's a hard worker, but probably a combination of things. She's probably somewhere right about in here after 15 years. Now, that's not to discourage her, especially if she tunes into this. What's nice is this: those 15 years then can springboard her into way down the field. If she's able to get over a couple of hurdles. So it's not been wasted time. Okay. But you could actually be in this early stage forever. Okay. So this is not a matter of time. This is a matter of progress. It's a matter of how much work is being done. Okay. The yardage, right? We want to make Okay, so it's not automatic. This is actually there's a flow to it, but it's not automatic because you can put the brakes on at any point in time. Okay, so we already looked at the overall what can cause someone to either not start or kind of be having the parking brake on as you move through. One is just the overall ambivalence to therapy. You're not sure if this is what you want, what you need. You're not sure if this is safe, if you want to try it again. Okay. Ambivalence regarding the therapist, because if you have never done it, therapy, well, you're going to sit down with somebody. If you've done it before, now the question is, what caused the end of that last therapeutic relationship? And do you want to try it again? All those are very real. Okay, so here's some of the factors that would cause you to put the brakes on or keep the dragging in anchor, right? Okay. Is the therapist, is he or she trustworthy? Okay, so that's a big thing. Are they confidential? Now, not just functionally, but that is also on an emotional level on your side. It doesn't mean you're emotional, it just means this. If a part of you feels that somehow, you can't really trust, and we're going to talk about a plant here in a moment, I'll describe that. But like, can you trust them to keep a secret, so to speak? Right? You don't want to keep secrets in general, but in counseling, you want to be able to make sure, do you trust them, that person? Okay. For instance, I'll give you an example. If you're a female, the question is, do you want a male therapist? That's a legitimate question. Would I fault a female for saying, no, I can't work with a male? No. Or vice versa. There are times that you want, if you're a female, there are times that you want a female therapist. For a guy, that's interesting. I almost kind of believe that guys should work with guys. Now, John, do you believe that women should work with women? Not necessarily. There's a contradiction in terms right there. How can you? It's interesting because I think for a guy, I'm just going to kind of process this real fast. Does that mean a guy can't? Oh, gosh, for those of you female therapists, I've just lost all my audience. Huh? No, hold on. Women can do a good, of course they can. I'm going to get myself in trouble. Let me start over again. Okay. Do I believe that female therapists can't do an effective job with men? I'm not saying that whatsoever. Is it important for a guy to be able to work with a female therapist? I can make a big case as to why that will be effective. But let me tell you, I think what's unique about the woundedness of a guy, because especially if he's been molested, if he's been sexually abused, then on some level, there's very male issues. And I think for him, a case could be made for females as well, right? But especially for a guy, I want to challenge guys. And that's not to say if a guy has a female therapist, don't stop, if good work is being done. And for a female therapist, if you're working with a guy, I'm not saying that you need to stop working with them. But I think the healing at the end of the day, okay, at the end of the day, until a guy can feel comfortable in his own masculinity. Now, that's not a sexist statement. How about this? Can he be a tender warrior? Can he understand what it's like to have tensile strength but be under control? Is he okay with his masculinity? Because probably what's happened? Well, he's been sexually abused. Probably by what gender or sex? Males. So what's happened to him? Part of him has been emasculated. And a part of him has no idea what it's like to have a trustworthy relationship with a male. So he's either under or over compensating. So to be able to have a guy work with a male therapist, I think there's a lot of positive things to that. But again, if you're a female therapist and you're seeing males, that's fine, right? I don't want to get myself in trouble. I probably just did. But anyways, I just really want to challenge guys to think about seeking out a male therapist, because it may be, again, or start with a female therapist, and then I can't save myself in this. But until a guy can really connect with another male non-sexually, I don't think he's going to be healed. Okay, because there's also a father wound in that. Gordon Dalby's an excellent book, Healing the Wounded Masculine Soul, I think, something like that. Okay, moving along. Um, is the therapist knowledgeable, and are they competent? Knowledgeable, do they have what's called a fund of knowledge, meaning a body of knowledge? Do they understand? And it's one thing to know, but it's another thing to be able to put that into practice. So are they a competent therapist dealing with trauma? I'll give you a couple examples of somebody that's knowledgeable but not very competent. Somebody may be knowledgeable with trauma and knowledgeable with parts, but let's say they find they're up to, they found, or 50 parts have been revealed. So somebody has 50 parts. Jon, is that possible? Of course it's possible. But let's say they think, you know what, this is just there's too many. And I think at this point we have enough. And so if there's any more, what we're going to do is we're going to just kind of pray that they're healed and pray them away. Okay, that's not good. Maybe that would also be a lack of knowledge. How about this? This is very controversial, but I don't care. I'm going to say it anyways. How about if somebody has connected with a part, and that part is very powerful and calls himself Lucifer? Is that client not just demon possessed, but Satan possessed? Okay. I'll tell you that they're not. Okay. Controversial, but I'll tell you that they're not. You keep listening. We've touched on this a little bit, but in future programs, I'll tell you why. I just had a client and we had to deal with that. Okay. How about with a verse that once the house is cleaned and if it's not filled, then what happens? Right? That the demon will go out, right? And that presupposes that parts are demons, that they're not. Can somebody be demon possessed? Yep, but the parts aren't demons. But they're told that the person's told that if you cast them out, and if the house is swept clean and it's not filled, then what happens? Right? More come back. Well, if the therapist can't differentiate and distinguish or doesn't have the knowledge to understand the difference between a demon versus a part that feels like a demon, was told they're a demon, is convinced they're a demon, has the anger and rage of a demon, then guess how they're going to approach when they come across one that calls themselves Abaddon or Apollyon or Satan, right? They're going to approach that differently, and I think probably in an unhealthy way. Okay. Do you believe that there's such things as curses? Okay, that's an important issue. I don't. Jon, how can you say that? Well, stay tuned. I'll give the brief answer. There's only one spiritual entity that can curse, and that is God. Okay, Satan can run his mouth, but he can't curse. Okay, right? That's important, and we should get maybe some reactions from that. That's not gratuitous, but it's really important because if you've been cursed, there's no hope for you. But if somebody ran their mouth and made you feel they're cursed, then guess what? The truth will set you free and you're not cursed. Okay. He who the Son has set free will be free indeed. It doesn't have a parenthetical thought that says, unless you were SRA or MK Ultra. Okay. Competent also, can they practice in such a way? Not practice, meaning can they conduct themselves as far as do they have a sense? Do they have their knowledge? And can they put into plans, as it were, as the ball is being moved downfield? Do they know the right plays to call, so to speak, to help you, to suggest the right things at the right time, so to speak? So that would be competence. And fearing that your therapist is a plant. That's very much MK Ultra and SRA. What would a plant be? Someone who the enemy, not just spiritual enemy, but a handler, so to speak, and there are a lot of those out there, right? What percentage do we think there are handlers, one behind every rock? I don't believe that, but all it takes is one of them to trigger somebody. And the last thing you want is some supposed pastors are plants, right? So That's a real concern. You can see how that would cause a client to put the brakes on or not release the brakes. So those kind of concerns. It takes time for you as a client to begin to find out, and it's okay to ask questions. You need to. Um, in a way, over time, right? You'll have a sense whether or not it's okay to drop your guard or not. If you can't fully drop your guard, you're going to put the brakes on somewhere. So it's a challenge, right? Because it's just part of the risk. Okay, and the other thing that would bring about ambivalence is reluctance toward emotional vulnerability. There's dropping your guard. Therapy isn't going to work if you can't become emotionally vulnerable, and that's part of the challenge. Okay, so we looked at again, ambivalence regarding therapy, ambivalence regarding the therapist, now ambivalence regarding the therapeutic process. Okay, so let's say you get to a point where, okay, I can risk entering into therapy for the first time, or again, I'm willing to do that. Now I found a therapist I think that is trustworthy, I think I can work with. Okay, I think they're trustworthy, I think they know what they're doing. So now therapy gets underway. And what's the process going to be like? What's going to happen? So now we've stepped onto the field. Right? We're going to try it again. Now I've chosen a coach, and now let the game begin, so to speak. Now it's okay. Can he help move me down the field? What's going to happen in the first 5 yard lines, first 10 yard line, and then what plays are we calling in there to be able to make progress? Okay, so the question is, what will emerge? Okay, that can cause someone, if a part of me is dedicated or guaranteeing that nothing's ever going to emerge, so I just want to stay more intellectual, then guess what's going to happen, right? I'm only going to get so far, because what happens if pain starts to come up? If you have past abuse, it's going to come up. But if you're saying, nope, everything's in the past, I have no memories, therefore, if I had memories, if I needed to remember them, I would, therefore, I don't remember, and therefore it means that I don't remember. I want to move on. Help me to lower my anxiety. Okay. Well, if you have trauma in your background, that's just that approach isn't going to work for you, right? It has to be goodness of fit. So if you understandably are fearful that something will emerge, but if you're dedicating yourself to making sure nothing emerges, then that's what's going to happen. So that will cause you 1 foot in the boat, 1 foot on the dock. You're going to do the splits, meaning it's not going to go well. At some point in time, you're going to stop that. Okay, now I'm not faulting any client, right? It just means this is what you're going to have to consider, because a part of you is considering this. Trust me. As a therapist, you may want to speak to some of these, even maybe pull out this bullet point list and review this with the client. Okay, can I just get some coping skills, right? So this kind of goes hand in hand with that. Can I just get some coping skills to get myself back together instead of dredging up the past or going on some sort of emotional wild goose chase, right? Is that a normal thing to ask? The answer is yes, right? If that's you and you've had that thought, that makes you normal, right? It doesn't make you resistant. It doesn't make you, um, right? It just means you're normal. But now let me speak to you. If you've never had that thought, that's good. That's okay. But a lot of clients, right? Basically, do I really need to open up a can of worms? I think I said that down somewhere else. Okay. You can't be faulted for wanting just to move forward. So let's get some skills so I can move forward, because everything was going fine. And the real question is this, though: was everything fine before? The answer might be, well, of course it was fine. I was functional. I had a good paying job. Everything was fine. Was it? Well, of course it was. Okay. Were you ever able to relax? Shut up. I don't want to talk to you. Right? Were you able to, did you find that you were content? Were you able to uh, rest on the inside? Were you able to state your preference? Have you found satisfaction in life? Were you able to be fully emotionally present? Or has the past, have you been affected because you've been on medication or you've been numbing out somehow? Have you been living your fully authentic life? Okay. So I'm not going to fault a client for saying, I just need to get myself back together. But the question is, what does that mean? And look at the list, precipitating list over here on the left. How are things going? And you know what? These are more than just behavioral issues, meaning just put a little Band-Aid on it. Okay, if you're experiencing those things, this is not a Band-Aid approach. There's not a Band-Aid approach. Okay. Will things get worse if things start to surface? That's legitimate. That's a legitimate question. The answer is yes, but it doesn't mean that you're going to drop off a cliff as far as you being non-functional. Okay, now it's going to get worse, but that's a legitimate concern, and you need to be prepared for that. The next one, will I lose my mind if I start hearing voices in a more direct way? Where does that come from? Remember some of the real concerns about hearing voices. Does that make me crazy? By the way, there's 5 different reasons for voices. Em and I have talked about that in the past program. Go back and start in part 1 of our series here. Okay. You will not lose your mind if you start hearing the voices in a more direct way. Actually, you'll start to gain your mind. Okay. It's not going to invite sanity. It's actually going to start helping sanity. And that's going to be the key in this beginning early stage, is you have to begin to get to know you on the inside. That's a primary thing that takes place during the beginning stage. That's really the key. Will I go away on the inside and the parts take over? And therefore, will I do crazy things? Wait, I'm sorry. Let me move this out of the way so I can see what I've written here. Okay, will I go away on the inside and the parts take over? And therefore, will I do crazy things and ultimately be out of control? That is a very legitimate concern. That was just discussed in a session I had today with a client, right? The fear is, wait a second, because the key is in this beginning stage, you have to get to know your parts. This is where you're really getting to know them, and you're helping them get to know each other, and you're working through trauma. But right about in here, it's you are getting to know the parts. Well, that means the very first stage is you have to risk acknowledging them. Well, what is that going to do? That's going to bring up some of these questions. Like, okay, if I acknowledge them, will they all of a sudden take over and I'll never return? It may feel like that, but that's not going to happen. Okay. And you won't do crazy things. You start to do crazy things when you try to shove this out of existence, when you try to plug up or stop up hearing from the voices. That's when you have what's called amnesic fugue, right? When you hear that somebody drives, they suddenly find themselves 1,000 miles away in their car. They've gone on a shopping spree or gotten married or did something crazy, right? The reason that happens is because they're not talking to their parts. Okay, so the way to increase the likelihood you're going to do something crazy, so to speak, or parts are going to take over, is to not acknowledge them. And so they're going to have to become more forceful. That power will increase. And before you know it, the switch has taken place and they have put you way down there. So I suggest work with them. Okay. And what about false or repressed memories? Is that what it says? Let me get out of this here. Wait, where to go? Hold on. Sorry about that. I'm trying to let me get out of this. There we go. I want to go back to, no, where do I want to go back? No, where did I go? Sorry, everyone. Ambivalence therapist. There we go. Okay, there we are. So maybe I'll just stick with this for a moment. What about false or repressed memories? Okay. We're all familiar with the fraudulent group, the now defunct group, the false memory syndrome, or false memory foundation, who had an attorney on there that also apparently defended Epstein and other prolific perpetrators. They had a pedophile on there. They are a group that, as a matter of fact, Loftus. If Miss Loftus, is within the sound of my voice, I would love to challenge her to a public debate, honestly. So anytime, anywhere. Okay, she apparently has been a special witness in court, has testified many, many times. So I welcome the opportunity. If she wants to do a public debate, I will help her understand about repressed memories. So, how do you ensure that you don't have false memories? Are there such things as false memories? There can be. How can that come about with a sloppy therapist? Okay, now what do I mean by that? A therapist that has wanted you to be further along than you are. Okay. So, is it tempting at times? Let's say you're working with someone and they're starting to get recollections of something. They start to remember when they're young, and before you know it, um, they're seeing, and therefore they're reporting in sessions. They're starting to see their bedroom, and they're in their bed, and they hear footsteps at the door. This is what happens. Recollection. Okay, let's say I, as a therapist, have already put two and two together, which need to be careful. But let's say it's not too hard. Let's say the client consciously remembers dad had all these Playboys, dad had camera equipment, dad would uh, do questionable things with the doing photographs and do all sorts of questionable things. He was always patting their daughters on their naked rear ends. And there's just enough things that say, you know what, this guy really has the red flags of the perpetrator. So let's say I, as a therapist, am pretty darn convinced that the father perpetrated upon the daughter. Now, as an adult, I'm working with that adult daughter. Will it help the client if she remembers and therefore is able to go through the process? They're really grief and loss stages. Coming to terms with anger, putting knapsacks where they belong. Absolutely. That's what has to happen because she has owned the responsibility for that in one way or another. Okay. So let's say it's not rocket science. Let's say I've already figured it out, and let's say accurately so. Is it tempting for a therapist because they want to help the client see the light or remember something to actually say, okay, and let's say she says the doorknob is coming, I see somebody, I don't see a face, to then ask this question, do you see your dad's face? Okay, now, in the best of scenarios, I can understand why a therapist would do that, right? Because I know it's dad. How do I know? Let's say it's not rocket science. Okay, let's say Jimmy Savile from England had, I don't know if he had any daughters, but let's say a genuine bona fide pedophile that we all agree, as a matter of fact, let's say he was convicted and now we're working with the daughter. So let's say there's no question based upon the evidence that the father who's now doing time perped. So it's not a far reach for a therapist, as she says, he's over me, he's on top of me, but I can't see the face. I can understand why a therapist might say, is it your father? Do you see your father? Okay. I want to caution therapists. You don't want to do that. Why? Because it's premature in this sense. If she needs to see it, well, of course she needs to see it in order to be, if and when the time is right. If she sees the body, if she sees the hands, if she sees the shoulders, if the only thing she isn't seeing is the face, why do you think that is? Because part of her is not ready to. So you don't need to fill in the gaps. Because also what could happen is this. If you bring it up and it's too soon, therefore you're filling in the gaps, what's going to happen? The part of her that's preventing her from seeing it is going to take that information away anyway. So after session, the next session comes along, she likely still won't remember. She's going to see a blank, and you're going to think, wait a second, didn't we already talk about this? No, you forced the issue too soon. And what do you open yourself up to the claims of by the naysayers? That you implanted a false memory. That's why I don't do hypnosis, I don't do guided imagery, and I don't do EMDR. Now, EMDR has been effective. So, and I've gone through the certification course. I just haven't been certified in it because for me, I'm still convinced I don't want to do that. EMDR is very effective for here and now trauma. I just want to caution people when it comes to complex trauma, which inevitably has to do with childhood issues. I just see more downside than positive. And I'm becoming ever more convinced that we want to stay away as therapists. We want to stay away from anything that anybody could point to, including leaving the client wondering, did that come up on its own? So for a therapist, the reason it's tempting to do that, to fill in gaps, is either out of our own empathy. I want them so badly to get healed, so to speak, or because I don't like this, right? Some therapists are getting tired and they want to move the process along. Well, that's not good. Okay, there's other ways to do that, but you want to do it in such a way that the client can assimilate the memories. So the false memory foundation played upon therapists, and there probably were therapists that did that sort of thing, especially guided imagery or hypnosis, or they wanted the client to so badly remember that the therapist, filled in the gaps. Okay. As a therapist, I'm telling you, don't do that. Nothing good comes from that. Allow the healing to take place and allow it to come up. I don't care if I've already concluded, right? It's not up to me to say it. It's not up to me to try to fill in those gaps. Why? Because when it's time, if something needs to come up, it will. And therefore, when it comes up, guess what? Now, the only thing that the client has to wrestle with is the shock of it all. That's hard enough. So we can't fill in gaps. And I'm aware I've been talking for about an hour, almost 2 hours. Um, you know, okay, we'll go to one more. Okay, we'll do one more. I've got quite, you can see over in the thumbnail. Okay, I've got quite a few more. And between now and next episode, I'm going to have a lot more. So this will also be a work in progress. But just for the sake of time, right? I can keep going for a long time. I don't want to lose my audience. Okay, so we're going to go to one more here. What are some things in the early stage? We're still under ambivalence regarding the process. Okay, what if you open me up and then decide to leave because it becomes too much? Okay, that's a very legitimate question. And a lot of clients experience that, by the way, abandonment by their therapist. Sometimes a therapist has to move. Obviously, two different things, but it can still feel like what? It can still feel like abandonment. Here's another thing. What happens if insurance stops paying? There's a lot of things that can interrupt, but each will have a different sense or leave the client feeling differently, with different emotions. Okay, so I really want to caution people. Therapists, it may sound, especially in this day and age, it may sound, how do I want to put it? Kind of um, like this is horrible. I'm just going to say it anyways. It can sound like a resume enhancer if you say, you know what, I work with complex trauma. Okay, that's horrible, but I'm just saying it. Okay, well, I want to caution therapists about working with complex trauma if you don't intend to work with complex trauma. If you work with complex trauma, you are not going to make very much money. So if you're in this to make money, number one, I don't think you should be a therapist. Now, a worker is worth his wages and all that, but you're going to end up giving away, if you're a therapist worth your salt, there's a balance here. I'm just going to say it. You're going to be giving away hours. Okay. There's just no other way to put it. Now, those of you that can afford therapy or can't, it's very important because think about a therapist. He needs to live, he needs to be able to make a living. But it's just, I've seen too many situations where some therapist will not think in terms of a sliding fee scale. And therefore, it really hinders a client because a client then can only afford 1 hour once a week. I think I have that down in here. Oh, will I be in therapy for 25 years? Okay. If you're working with a therapist that only sees you 1 hour, one time a week, because that's all insurance will pay for it, you're probably going to be in therapy for a long period of time because you're going to need more. So it's just a mess. This, right? Meaning in this sense, it's so hard It's hard as a therapist. I wish I could see everybody for free. I give a lot of hours of therapy away per week for very low cost or for free. And it's just hard, right? So I've been told I have voluntary poverty, but that doesn't help pay the mortgage, right? So there's a balance. Um, for the clients, what I would say is this: also be mindful that there could be a part of you that think that if a therapist is willing to go over time, view that as a gift. Okay, because there are some clients that if a especially if it's coming to the end of a session, I would ask any clients, those of you that are clients, watch the clock as much as the therapist has to watch the clock in this sense. And that's a hard thing. He probably has a client after you. Okay, so that's an important thing. And he probably has to go to the bathroom after you. He may have to write some notes. So be mindful that the therapist needs about 10 minutes. How about in your with your session? And he or she's seeing somebody just before you. Don't you want them to feel refreshed, as it were, and be able to be fully present with you? So I really do want to encourage clients that be active in that therapy process and help bring things to a close. If you sense things are going over, if the therapist starts to bring it up more than once, just understand as the clock is ticking, there may be another client waiting in the waiting room. And I'm going to say this with as much love as I can. You don't want to be selfish because other people need to have help too. But that also doesn't mean that if a therapist has extra time and you're sensing that they're going over, I don't want you to caretake them either. This is a delicate issue. This is um, so if you feel from the one way to do it is, let's say you start to go over, you can say, "Oh, I'm aware I'm going over," and so the therapist. Now the question is, should you be charged or not? So there's so many different issues. Huh? Um, I get if I can and I'm able to go over a little bit, commonly I will, simply because near the end of the session, inevitably there's really productive stuff happening. If you can, if you're the client, try to get into the productive stuff sooner rather than later. It's human nature to not want to, but if you save it till later, then you're going to put pressure on yourself and especially the therapist to maybe keep running over. Okay, will therapy make me worse if things start coming up? It's the healing process. You're lancing a wound. Maybe that's the best way to put it. Okay, so it is going to get worse. Does that mean you're going to decompensate? Depends upon how you define that. Are there ways of managing the pain? Yes, we actually talked about some of that last time. Venting is a very important thing. How long before things start to get better? Two responses to that. One, it's going to take a while, but how quickly do you want to get through this? Remember the idea of a football field. Maybe I'll use that graphic next time. That's pretty good, right? If you're picking up the ball on the 2-yard line, how long is it going to take you to get to the end zone? Get down to the field, whether soccer or basketball, whatever analogy we want to use, I almost said a drag race. This is really a marathon, but let's say a journey to healing. You're on safari. I don't know whatever analogy we want to use. Point A to point B or point Z. How long? It just depends upon how fast you want to work or how hard you want to work, how fast you're moving it. But Rome was not built in a day. You're not going to get through this in a day if you went through years and years of sexual abuse. Okay. But there should always be progress. And I think for someone with SRA, MK Ultra, be prepared for about probably a minimum of 3 years. I don't want to discourage you, but it's going to take longer than a year. Why? Because there's also the satanic calendar, and you're going to experience each one of those for the first time with that therapist and really opening stuff up. And it just takes a long time. This could be a year to a year and a half to 2 years in here in that metal working stage. Why? Because this is where all the programming, and I don't hate that word, by the way. I know I've said it a lot. Okay. This is where the heavy duty work is. Well, it takes a long time, but you can be moving through this in a fairly productive fashion. Okay. How long could this first stage take place or it take? um, anywhere between 6 months to a year in there. Okay. Certainly, it's probably going to take 3 months because remember, a key to this is you getting to know your parts. And the question is this: how well do you know them? Are you ready to meet them? Have you met them? Do you have direct communication? Do you have a sense of who they are? Do you know where they are on your internal map? Uh, are you aware of who talks to who and who doesn't talk to who and who's antagonistic to who? Okay, there you go. It's going to take, right? It's going to take a little bit of time. Can I just do therapy a couple of times per month and get better? There we go. So that would be, can I do it like once an hour or maybe a 2 hour session every other week? Um, I have a client that's doing that, and she was pretty insistent. And ultimately, the client's in charge. I just I cautioned her that it may be just enough to begin to rip scabs off, and the pain may be counterproductive because if you start to make progress and stuff starts to come up, what happens if the firefighters that are I'm circling this because this is where the firefighter work will be, work with the programmed parts. So if stuff starts to come up, like for instance it did with that particular client, really profound stuff. Yeah, I mean, some of the most profound stuff I think I've ever heard. Okay, and I've been doing this for a while. Well, at the end of 2 hours, it came up. And that's going to be stuff that's going to take a long time to process. Well, it came up so soon that what do you think the parts here did with that when session ended? Oh, we're battening down the hatches because a part gave up information that is way down deep inside that has some keys to unlock a whole lot of stuff. So what's probably going to happen when I see her again, if she doesn't cancel future sessions, I'm not faulting her, is she may be going through unnecessary pain because parts of her are going to do what? They're going to get down on her. So I'm concerned. I'm never going to turn anybody away, but it's always difficult for me because my only option would be and then to say, no, I can't work with you. Well, that's not helpful. So I'm just taking a very methodical approach with her and allowing stuff to come up. And then once I know that parts suddenly are emerging, because I probably saw 5 different parts during our session, I just take note. I just gingerly want the conscious part of her to sort of know that stuff may be coming up. Okay, so if you stretch it out, you're potentially going to stretch it out for 25 years. Okay. What is the difference between CBT and trauma therapy? CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, that is normal kind of talk therapy. Now, it's beneficial in this sense. What it simply means is this: as go beliefs, so go your thoughts, so go your feelings, so goes your behavior. That's normal. But it's dealing with what I call adult kind of beliefs. Okay? We all have adult kind of beliefs. If you put your finger in a light socket, you will get shocked. We all believe that. Why don't we try testing going against the law of gravity? Because we all have beliefs in the law of gravity. That's a healthy thing. But trauma will prevent me from being fully present in reality. So let's say things have calmed down. Let's say there's nothing to worry about. But now I'm suddenly anxious and I'm having a panic attack. And CBT would say, you know what? Why don't you just remind yourself or snap a rubber band around you, right? Memorize certain things. So as you start to experience that panic attack, take every thought into captivity, memorize that God loves you. I'm not making light of any of this, but no amount of reminding yourself no amount of changing your thoughts, right? Because what does that say? Right, here's the classic thing: having a panic attack. What the heck's going on with me? There's nothing to worry about. Why am I, right? That's sort of, you're trying to do your own cognitive behavioral therapy. Okay, trauma, if you have panic attacks, it's not on an intellectual level. It's on an emotional level. It's stemming from something. A part of you is reliving something at a deeper level. Okay, so CBT won't get to that. Trauma therapy allows stuff that's been pushed away, that has been repressed or suppressed, to finally come up in its time, on its own time, and when it's ready. Okay, so that's why you're not going to have false memories, because nobody's going to implant anything in you. And so the false memory perps, as we call them, the jerks, the perps and the perp apologists, now have to sit down and shut up. Because if I'm not doing hypnosis, if I'm not doing guided imagery, if I'm not doing EMDR, if I'm just sitting there doing normal therapy with someone, and up comes some stuff, then guess what? Stuff's coming up. So nobody implanted that, right? It's not false. So if anybody wants to debate from that school of thought for the false, as a matter of fact, you know what? I'll name names. Sierra Weir, since you publicly, Excelensic on X, on Twitter, since you publicly posted about false memory and how Euler facilitates the satanic ritual abuse that's part of false memory, I welcome you anytime you come on our program. We'll debate about this, since you, as a speech pathologist, first of all, you're outside your scope, aren't you? Stay in your own lane instead of running your mouth. But since you've never done therapy, you really wouldn't know what it looks like when a memory comes up, would you? For you, it's conjecture, but my, oh my, like you and others, they run your mouths about false memories. Because what? We implant them? No. I stay away from any of that. So if anybody wants to debate the issue of false memories, you're more than welcome to join Emma and I. We'll have a little discussion. Okay? And we'll be able to talk about how many clients you've seen. Yeah, 0, and you know it. Okay, we're going to end with this. I'm going to jump to the blocks. We'll continue to look at what happens in the early stages. What are some of the things that will cause me to put the brakes, or a client cause me to, if I'm a client, cause me to put the brakes on, dragging an anchor behind the boat, so to speak. We'll slow the process down. Right now, we're going to look at a few things that will cause a barrier. Okay, so in order to break through and begin making additional progress, here's some of the things that'll cause me to stop. So these are some very predictable things that you'll have to break through. You'll have to work through in that very early stage. Fear of acknowledging that the voices are actually parts, that it's real and that you're not crazy. Fear of accepting that there may be more than a few parts. Very, very common, right? For somebody to say, okay, they don't even know they have a limit. So I say, don't put a limit, and don't worry that you're going to keep creating parts. You're not. Whatever amount of parts there are. Now you're going to find out who's there. Okay. But I can understand, because typically, subconsciously, most survivors, when they start this, they have kind of a limit of maybe 5 or 6 or 9 at the most. Um, can you have a lot? Depends upon what you went through. If it's SRA and MK Ultra, yeah. Why? Because you can have a single incident of heinous, horrific torture that a kid was going through, and there could be 5 parts that had to take the pain, that were generated from one event. And that's just from one event. So at that chart, in the chart of the different parts, remember, I have primary part, primary backup part, secondary, or primary secondary part, and secondary part, because if it's so intense that a part may be able to only last about 10 minutes in that horrific event, and then it needs to step back. So another part came out. So you can have 4 parts that actually have, together, they collectively have the memory for that event. Fear of acknowledging certain parts that to date have seemed harmful, negative, or irresponsible. We'll be talking about that. What about the parts that have, up to this date, maybe felt like they've caused me to cut, they've caused me to do irresponsible things, they've caused me to go out and do crazy things, it caused me to just do things that I regret? Okay, what I would say is this: it's happened to this point because there hasn't been the ability to start connecting with them. So the way to decrease the likelihood that that stuff's going to happen is to start connecting. Now, you'll eventually hit in that middle level with the gatekeepers, that the COO. There are those that are programmed to do a kill switch. Now, it's not inevitable in this sense. If you do this right and you do the work properly, the good work will start to reverberate and the permafrost will start to thaw, and you will start to eventually connect with those parts, and they won't be so walled off. They won't be so guarded. They won't be so reactive. And they'll be willing to take time. And that's how you actually decrease the suicidality. Okay. Fear of disruption of your current world and relationships. Okay. That's real fear, that if you feel like everything's going to break down and it's going to disrupt your current world and your relationships, and here's a possibility, it may. Now, disrupt your world depends upon what you mean by that, because remember all those symptoms. Your world has not been working well. It's become unmanageable. So you may have to rearrange some things. You may have to, it's not going to be business as usual, but it hasn't really been business as usual, has it? So you're going to have to cut back on a lot of things. You're going to have to take time for you. You're going to have to restructure things. Okay. And if you don't do it, what trajectory are you on right now? Right? The plane's going down, right? Not in a pretty way. You're losing altitude. So number one, what have you got to lose? Number two, it's not going to fall out of the sky. You're going to be able to pull it up just in time before you drive your plane into the ground. But you're right, it's going to look different, but that's okay. But that's part of what you're going to need to work through. Now, will relationships be disrupted? Very likely. Now, which ones? And depends. If your perpetrator, let's say right now you don't know who it is, but let's say a party has a sense. Let's say you're the victim of incest, but you haven't let yourself think about it, or you know it, but it became commonplace. Okay. Will your relationship with your perpetrator, who has to be within your family, will that change? Yep. Why? This truth is going to start to come up. So yes, that you have to be ready for. But you know what? Better go it alone and be with people, or even if it means you don't have anybody in your life, better go it alone, so that in the future you can have legitimate, healthy relationships, rather than settle for what? Settle for what you have. How are things now? At best, I'll tell you what you got. You've got a superficial relationship that drives you nuts and creates compulsivity within you. That's what you have, especially Mother's Day and Father's Day. And every time you go back home, what happens? It's certainly not restful, is it? It's certainly not leisurely. You don't get filled up. You come home and you do what? Or you leave them feeling what? Okay. So that tells you, there's part of you telling you this isn't good. And so why do you keep going back? As a matter of fact, if you're familiar with my series that I've done on boundaries, which at some point in time I'll continue. So go to SurvivorSupport.net under the podcast tab, scroll all the way down, and you're going to see that I talk a lot about pigs and dogs and fools. Okay. You don't want to have pigs and dogs. Jesus said, do not take what is special, give it to the dogs. Matthew chapter 7, verse 6. Those are people outside the home. Don't cast your pearls before. Those are inside the home. Pigs were domestic animals. What are your pearls? Your time, effort, energy, resources. For some of you, the question is this: why do you keep going back in the pig pen? Have they ever said thank you? Will it ever be enough? Has it ever changed? How much more time do you think you're going to continue to spend? How many more vacations are you going to continue to go and take time? You could go someplace that would be actually enjoyable and restful and recreational for you, but instead you spend it where? Out of obligation with who? And what do they say about you? And you continue to go back there expecting what? What's the definition from AA of insanity? Right? Doing the same thing you've always done, expecting a different outcome. You go back to where the gaslighters are. Why? because a part of you is very normal, and you think that if you keep giving and giving and giving, putting up with, tolerating, that's finally going to be enough, and you're finally going to hear thank you, and that they're finally going to say it's your turn, and you're going to be accepted. But guess what? As it has been up to this point, it probably is always going to be, unless you establish boundaries, which is based upon truth, which is based upon your preference, you having a voice, unless you state your preference, unless you have your boundaries, you're never going to know what's true. And you could continue in this no man's land, in this World War I, where you go out and it's mucky and how long could you keep doing this for? And sacrificing yourself on behalf of what? Family loyalty. Okay, blood is thick in the water. Whose blood? You know, who keeps getting stabbed in the back? Who keeps bury the hatchet? Oh yeah. So they don't do that for you. Family loyalty. How loyal are they? No, what you've got is a conditional relationship by people that have demonstrated that they are self-absorbed, they're black hole individuals, and you keep doing what? Giving and giving and giving and tolerating, putting up with. Why? In hopes that what? That someday you'll finally hear. They're never going to say it. If they had intended to say it, they would have said it by now. You'll never be enough to them. Why? Because they don't intend for you to be enough. So you have to stop. You have to care about yourself enough to be willing to look at the truth, let the chips fall where they may, so that the truth can finally set you free. But when you're driven to go back, you're not free. You're compelled. You're compulsive. That's not free, because perfect love casts out all fear. You need to be free. So you need to be aware, yes, it's going to likely make changes in the relationship. Fear discovery, that's legitimate, right? It's like, you know what? I don't even want to know. Okay. But how's it going at this point? Unless you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, unless you would rather, right? It comes down to this with this wall. I'd rather die than know. Okay, that means you ain't ever getting through that wall, right? You're going to die in a pile right here. Or even if it kills me because it's killing you, I'd rather die than not know, because at least I died trying to move toward freedom. So you are stuck and you need to get through this. Okay. And then fear of the worst case scenario. That is a huge part of this wall. But again, if you're not willing or not able to face the possibility of the very worst case scenario, that it is what it looks like, that stuff happened and that they did exactly what they intended to do and they didn't do anything other than that. It wasn't by accident, weren't because of they were reenacting their own trauma. I mean, once they got to a certain age where they truly had a choice, we'll say this, how about beyond the age of 18? Now, let me hold on. Okay, because I just thought of certain situations where, again, they can trigger you. Okay, the point at which you decided enough was enough and you started to look at that. Why did you do that, given the fact that nobody in your family has done that? Because a part of you did what? A part of you said, you know what, I've got to find out what is true. That is a part of you that's finally saying, you know what, I don't care, the buck stops here, there. What do you do up until now if you found out that even as an adult you were doing stuff? The difference is this. Did you relish, did you have a, were you acting on your preference if given a choice? Or were you there because they triggered you and you went obediently? There's a big difference. There's a big difference. That means you were not a perpetrator, but perpetrators, given any other alternative, that's where they want to be. And you know intuitively who was around you that wanted to be there rather than was in an altered state going through the motion. So there's a big difference. And that's important because there's enough false guilt you're going to have to work through. You don't need to be piling on. Okay. But the worst case scenario is that what you're seeing, what you're sensing is actually true. They're actually memories. They're not, it's not a horror movie. Oh, it's a horror movie, but it's not because you're remembering a horror movie. but this was your life, so you lived through it. Okay, on that note, you could tell we're going to continue working through. Emma, I'll come out of the screen here. So we will continue to work through. I think we just got through a couple of those slides. I will, between now and when we meet next, I'm probably going to have more for the beginning stage. I know I'll have more, just because there's a lot more. And then we'll continue. Then and this will match with the parts. So in the beginning stage, think about those first couple. Okay, I'll bring it back up, right? Let me do this because this will kind of match. Okay, so what we're covering in the first stage is really between, oh, this is a PDF, huh? Yeah, it is. Okay, is between the primary person, and it really is even do I even dip my toe in here? As well as, do I acknowledge this? Then working through the beginning stage, partway through the beginning stage, you're going to start to work with the subconscious parts. So that's why we're doing this. So you can begin to understand, what is the process? What are you going to experience? And how can the process be facilitated versus how you can kind of put the brakes on? And I'm sorry, you did here, I'm doing a start stop on you. Okay. But
Oh,
that's sort of the rationale. So okay, when you start therapy, you're going to begin to go through those levels, but here are the things that can hinder, put the brakes on, or here's the things that can help begin to make progress, move down the field, and go down deeper.
wow. First of all, bravo. That was a really awesome presentation. I love your presentations, and I know people listening do. It's really helpful to have a visual and sort of like a flow, and you never cease to amaze me and everybody else with how detailed you are and how much work you put into these. So thank you, John. That had to have been a lot of work for you, and that was a really awesome sort of start to finish presentation that you did. Thank you.
Well, they're welcome. There's more to come because it's important so that somebody can be fully prepared. Okay, that means you're an informed potential consumer and client, active in your own therapy.
Yeah, and I think too, having this reassurance, I think there's a lot of people not getting help because they're nervous, and you're helping sort of break that barrier. And like I say every week, it really feels like we're getting a free therapy session with you every time that you come on. We get to learn, but I think it's also very healing and empowering to learn all of this information to, how you talk about the knapsacks and boulders. All of this is just peeling all those negative layers off that go along with trauma that are really hard to not just heal, but I guess shed for good, and not take on again. So this was really awesome, and I know on behalf of everybody, I just thank you. I know that you have really busy days and weeks. You do so much, and you're still managing to, you do this for free, and it just from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for all the work that you put into this. It's really helpful, and I'm excited for this to keep building. We were talking before we started recording, and I know that we mentioned this, but I really want to push people to your work outside of this podcast, because you give us so much free information here, but even just on your websites, you have so many more hours of information elsewhere that you've put together, and on your YouTube. You're constantly putting content out, and we get little bits and pieces here on this podcast, which is amazing. But I want you to talk about survivor support. I want you to talk about your video archives and, your work that you do outside of coming here on the imagination.
Well, we'll do it quickly because you are kind enough and helpful enough, right? For each of these episodes, we review it, and I'm always happy to do so, and I appreciate it. But we'll just kind of go through it quickly. On other episodes, we'll take a little more time, but we're bless their heart if anybody's still with us by now. Okay,
Oh my gosh,
so
you did awesome. There's no rush.
did I do okay? Well,
Yeah.
the mind can absorb only what the body can handle, so.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is SurvivorSupport.net. The reason why I put this together was really an adjunct or an additional thing it was what I wished that I had at my disposal as a therapist to help my client keep the pump primed, so to speak, in between sessions. So it's really a resource to just continue helping jog somebody's mind, to help them kind of continue bringing stuff up, not gratuitously, but in a productive way, insights and things to think about, so that you never have to go into session saying, well, I didn't know what to write about. Okay, so now that I think about it, everybody, all clients, if you run into where you have a roadblock, I'll tell you what, go onto this site and peruse it a little bit, and you will have something to write about. Okay, so that's really how this is used. You kind of move from left to right. Emma, your and my series here is under the Help for the Journey, the third tab, fourth tab down. So the impact of trauma. If somebody wants to find at least the abbreviated version on your channel, you have the questions and answers. So I want to have everybody who goes to my channel, if you want to hear, so I always give sort of you ask the question, I start, but then I don't finish it because out of appreciation for you hosting this. I want people to be able, if they want the full episode and the answers to the questions, they have to come to the Imagination podcast. But the abbreviated, the kind of the meat of it, it's replicated right there, impact of trauma, as well as there are 2 PDFs that they can link to. The first is the trauma-related chart that we're going through. And if you scroll down, there it is. And I put the little PDF. Oh, that's a hard color, huh? I made, okay. But I think that link is live. So click on that and let's see where it goes. This is a good test. So there you go. So you can
Cool.
download that. That's the exact chart that we're using. So that's on there because we've had requests where people can find that. Then getting out of that, if you listen to the series on perpetrators and how to create a psychopath or what the minds of psychopaths, if you scroll down, I added one episode. I kind of put my own little thumbnail on it just to stand it right there. So the minds of the perpetrator, whatever I said about psychopaths, and there's that. There's also the link. So if people want to download that, you can just click on that. That'll take you to a downloadable version. So there you go.
Thanks, Jon. We had a lot of people asking for that. That's so cool. Thank you for doing that.
There you go. So you can print that out and kind of work with that. Okay, and then on SurvivorSupport.net, there is the podcast tab, and that is a repository. Although I'm running a little behind, but that's where you'll find a lot of the podcasts of the series on forgiveness, what it is versus what it is not. Eventually, I'll catch up. Right now, there's about 30 episodes, and then if you scroll down even further, you'll see the series on boundaries. So there's I don't know how many hours worth of free therapy.
So many.
If you cannot, and that's the only one I deal with sex offenders on this uh, um, website, okay, as far as video um, in this, okay, so I don't want somebody to get triggered thinking, wait a second, why did that talk about predators? But I really am, just as I'm being very methodical, you and I are being very methodical, episode by episode. I want people to understand I'm doing that with these. So I would really say this, if you want therapy in a very systematic way, go down to the very bottom and one by one, work your way through it. Okay, if you have not done that, I'm going to be so bold as to say this, if you haven't done it and you're stuck in therapy, then as lovingly as I can say it, you have nobody to blame but yourself. Now, let me qualify that, right? With all empathy, because if you listen to these, I'm not touting myself per se, but I know what's on these. Okay, it's talking about boundaries, it's talking about knapsacks. You will not be able to listen to these and not gain insight into why you have all the symptoms you do. Okay, so the answer is here, not because I'm a wonderful guy. I do think I'm kind of nice and funny and all that. But I've worked hard to deliver really good counseling content, going after the most important things, because in my estimation, every counseling situation should ultimately deal with 2 things: grief and loss, to bring the past into the present. And why is that important? So that in the present, I can be fully emotionally present, so that I can bring the right amount to any given situation, not too much, not too little, so that I don't have Bunsen triggers, I'm not reactive, so that I don't have depression, anxiety, panic attacks, right? So I'm not programmed. So the answer lies then in boundaries. Get your intuition back, and the programming will fall away. Your perpetrators, your programmers, had to disarm your intuition. These episodes will help you get that back. Okay, and then what else do I have? So, and then insights, that a lot of different topics. Again, just spend a lot of time going through this. The first six, 6 or 7, deal with family dynamics and toxic people. That'll give you enough to write about in your journal and take it into your therapist. Yeah, as a matter of fact, just spend a little bit of time and do some journaling about it. Take that into therapy. You'll have productive sessions. If you're having unproductive sessions, I'll give you probably a hint why. It's because you're coming in and you're sitting there and your therapist has to ask you this. Well, how are you feeling? Well, I don't know. Okay. I'm not faulting anybody. I'm not making fun of anybody. But how much progress do you think you're going to make? Okay. You're going to be in therapy a long time. So come prepared with stuff to talk about. It's a wonderful thing when a client can come in saying, if I say, so talk to me, what's been going on? I'll tell you. And they open up the journal. Now we got material to work with. That client is going to be on octane fast stuff going through therapy. But don't you want to get through this? So, anyways, if you go through as pain surfaces, survivor characteristics, indicator of sexual trauma, hindrances to healing, emotionally toxic people, toxic family dynamics, trust me, you are going to make it through therapy. You're going to have productive sessions. That's why. And then look at all the other stuff. So, okay, there you go. So that's SurvivorSupport.net. Hours and hours and hours of material on. It's free of charge. I never charge. And I want people to join your blog and your Substack, or Substack, sorry, Emma, right? You deserve that. But it's just, I just feel called. This is just my own thing, how the Lord has worked with me. So everything I do for me, I just put it out there because I'm older now. I'm older. I'm getting okay. I'm still a spring chicken, but I'm now in my 60s, and I want people to have this available. Okay. Okay. Which one is next? Why don't we go to churchprotect.org? This is more of a kind of my background, my research page. And under the Truths tab is where you're going to find some of that research and quote unquote my qualifications. At some point in time, again, I will publish. There's going to be a lot of information on there about my background and professional peer-reviewed material. It's one thing to have peer-reviewed. Academics, I spent 8 years on staff as an adjunct professor for Geneva College. Okay, I've worked in academia, but I'm going to tell you, if somebody's full-time academia, they're not in full-time anything else. And so they can sit there and talk amongst themselves, but that's fine. But if you're going to tell me about sexual abuse survivors, but your experience is limited in counseling, then you are theoretical. If you're going to tell me about psychopaths, but you went from your undergrad to master's to PhD, right to teaching, and you've never worked with psychopaths, and where's the only place you're guaranteed to work with psychopaths? If you've never worked in a prison, then and sex offenders, if you don't have hours and hours and hours, and you don't have access to all their files, your information, your experience, your data is limited. Okay, so I have professional peer review. So there we go. So a lot of stuff on there to learn about. Okay, and under the Insights tab, this simply because Survivor Support has gotten all full. It's really hard behind the scenes for me to add anything, so I've got to be honest, except under the podcast tab and what's new. So the place now, I take a few of the posts that I do primarily just on Twitter now because I just don't have time to do other stuff, is I try to take screenshots either before I get kicked off of Twitter or just so they're saved. So there's a repository of some of the different posts, and I always try to be thought-provoking. Some is controversial. I don't care if it is, because I just try to put truth out there and I want to have people think. Okay. I guess the next site would be unmaskingthetransmovement.com. And that has to do with the trans movement. Why? Because it is the greatest man-made ruse, scam, and scheme that is targeting vulnerable children and their families. And this is the perfect means for medical predators. So I'm sorry, medical predators, financial, kind of one and the same, and sexual predators to gain access to kids. So the reason why Brad Wilder and myself, Brad Wilder is that good-looking guy there, and the silver-haired guy, 40-year broadcaster, wonderful guy. He and I, and there's Ann Gillies, when she is able to join us. We all do this for free. Okay, we don't charge anything. Brad is a 40-year media guy, and so he hosts us, and we have different guests. So it's a wealth of knowledge. All these videos are accessed on Rumble, BitChute, and there's a YouTube channel. And we have just launched, by the way, a live version, which I can't figure out how to, I may have to upload the live versions, but we will be doing our third. We did not have one last week. On Mother's Day, we will be picking it up. Uta Hagen, a trans widow, will be our next guest. Then Alvin Louie of Courage is a Habit. He's already scheduled. So we're going to be having some wonderful people that we've actually had already. So I'm going back to old friends now that are professionals or very knowledgeable in their field. So join us Sunday evening for live. That's where you can ask live Q&A from 9 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And every now and then I'll just do it. So if you want to hear my thoughts on certain things, the CAS report, you may be familiar with that. That is a report. That's a instructor's or a psychologist's last name. Dr. Cass reviewed for 4 years about the medical transitioning of kids. And so that really has shaken up the world of those that have been pushing this medicalization. So if you want to understand what the CAS report is, speak to it on that program. It's for an hour. And then what else do we have? I do have a blog, SurvivorSupport.us. Haven't been able to add to that, but there's a lot of information about predators. So SurvivorSupport.us, you can get to that through that blog. And then recently I've been reminding people I am on Quora. So there's another thing. I think on my Twitter page, I think I recently added that. And the reason I added that, I haven't been able to, do I have Quora on there? I do not. You know what? I posted that once or twice in the past month. But if you're familiar with Quora, that's a question and answer. I think it's just Jon K. Uhler. You can look me. I'll put that back up there at some point, because I spend time or have spent time. All the questions pretty much have to do with psychopaths and sociopaths. So if anybody wants to look at some of those, so I'll make sure that's up there. And then, so here we are. Here's Twitter. And did I already do, I guess, on my own YouTube. So there we are, Emma. That covers it. I've tried to do a playlist. I have to get that updated. Emma, you and I are there. So you can see that right there. I don't know how many we have in there, 7, but I'll have to update that. So there you go. So just really trying to provide resources to people, those that are healing or those that want to be protective of women and children. So that's really what I'm all about.
And I really, really encourage you guys to go support Jon on all these platforms. There literally is so many hours that you guys can spend just diving deep into a lot of these topics. The forgiveness topic alone and the boundaries topic, they're extremely important. They're very, very well done. They are in depth in all the ways that we need them to be to have a thorough understanding of these really complex topics. And Jon has really spent time putting in the decades of work that he has experienced and that he's learned from working with survivors and also predators into this really awesome archive for you guys to just learn all the different layers of the spectrum from abuse to healing. So I really encourage you guys to dig into that. A lot of you write me and say, I really want to buy this book, or I want to, take this course or get therapy. I don't have money. And I totally understand that. And so does Jon. And so he's really trying to reach everybody as best as he can with one-on-one work. You guys can contact him from his blog, or you guys can DM him on Twitter, but he has a contact page um, on his survivor support page. So you guys can contact him there.
Under the home tab, you can get to that. As well as if anybody would like to sit down with me and chat, you can see the schedule button right there.
And he's taking clients too. So if you are in a position where you're ready, you guys are ready to get to work, you're ready to work with somebody, you have the financial means. Jon's also very generous with the time that he gives paying clients also. So please don't hesitate to reach out, you guys. As you can see, he's very transparent. He pours his heart out. He wears his heart on his sleeve. And anything that you guys want to know, he's there for you. So if you guys are ready to schedule, you guys can do that right from his website. Or you guys can, take that journey of watching all of his videos and prepping yourself for when you are ready to get therapy. And I really, really encourage you guys to do that. It's awesome to have somebody like Jon who's literally busy all the time working a regular job, a regular full-time job, and then he's giving us all this free stuff that we can look at in our spare time. Very, very generous of him. So I encourage you guys to go dig into all of that and to follow his YouTube channels. He has two of them, like he said, Unmasking the Trans Movement and Jon K. Uhler LPC. Tons of videos on there.
If I might, if somebody would like to do me a favor, so to speak, I'm not soliciting, but if you go to Unmasking the Trans Movement on YouTube, we are massively shadow banned.
Yes.
But look at how many, we've got 489 subscribers. If you look at these videos on here, I would say this, you're not going to find a collection of more important, how many do we have up there? Scroll back up, I'm sorry. How many videos? Okay, 130 videos. You want, I'm convinced, as far as from a clinical perspective. So it does break my heart a little bit, doesn't discourage me, but these videos should have over 1 million views each. How many parents, how many grandparents, how many churches don't know how to stand up in front of a school board, how to address people online, these trans freaks? How about this? Title IX is being done away with in the US. Title IX is women's sports. Okay, do you know what to say to keep men out of women's sports? How about, do you know what to say to keep men out of women's prisons? Do you know what to say to make sure that sexually deviant, cross-dressing men who are wearing women's underwear and drag do not come into women's private spaces? You will learn, look at it right down there, a close look at a deviant husband and transsexual apostate. Okay, all of these, Pierre Barnes right there that you just said. As a matter of fact, do you know what's in your child's school library, especially if you're in Canada, but in real time? I think he's done it in the US. Do you know that Pierre, you can find the link in that in that episode. Pierre gives parents the ability to go into his site, click a link, type in your school, and you have real-time access like a librarian to find out what books are on the shelf. Are they checked out and who's checked them out? What kid is reading what books? Okay, it's phenomenal. Look at the little thumbnail sketch. That's a kid giving oral sex to another kid. Okay, if that were an actual photograph, those perps would be arrested that hand out that book, but they put all those pictures in drawing forms to avoid any legality. We have Scott Nugent right there. We have research under the Free to Change study, Ed Sparius. I wrote chapter 5 in that. So you can see we've got sex trafficking, we've got uh, trans widows, we've got psychologists, we have MDs. So look at, and it saddens me, look at episode 59, 13 views. Yet we have people that don't know how to respond to people saying there is non-binary. You should immediately be able to say, there's what? No, there's only binary, and here's the reason why. Okay. The reason why people can't do that is they haven't done the study. They haven't studied enough. We've brought the material to people. So I really want to encourage every parent, every grandparent, every good person, every church to subscribe and start spending time listening, because you will find out. There's just lots and lots and lots of material. How about if somebody says, well, what about intersex? You've interviewed somebody that actually has that condition. So you will be able to speak knowledgeably, because that will be brought up, that how dare you put limits because these people are intersex. So furries, the guy that wrote the book on the dangers of furries, that's in there. We have all sorts of the move to legalize pedophilia. So those are all in there. So I really, really encourage people to spend time. It's a wealth of information. And now the live podcast, you'll be able to ask experts. So if you want to talk to Uta Hagen, we also probably will have Tracy Shannon back on. Um, these are the people that really know what they're talking about. So trans widows. So if you want to find out whether or not these deviant guys that walk out on their wives because they want to cross dress um, deserve sympathy and need our understanding, tune in as well as go back and watch some of these. So we've got a lot of information, as you can tell. So if you want to do me a favor, so to speak, is to go and subscribe so that we can get those numbers up, so that it also then makes it worthwhile, as it were, right? So I'm going back to some of our good guests and say, hey, you want to spend your Sunday night? And they're normal, right? They look at this like, you've only got 489 subscribers, Jon. And it's hard to explain to them. So we're just really massively shadow banned. So it would be nice to be able to say, hey, we've got 3 million subscribers. Because when I look at some of these other people that have hundreds of thousands of views, these, there should be these, I mean, even that one, the second little thumbnail down there, silencing the trans lambs or trans lambs, right? Are you aware, just the viewer, are you aware how physician assisted suicide is being backdoored toward targeting the kids that are in the trans movement? So it's really important for people to get up to speed, because there's going to be a lot of stuff that's coming down the pike still. Okay, there we go.
I agree, and this all intersects, a lot of it might seem separate to a lot of you who might be new to some of this, or if you're just learning about it. But really, the therapeutic side, the sexual deviant side, the trans movement, pedophilia, all the way to MK Ultra, satanic ritual abuse, it literally all ties in together. So I love that John's covering all of these bases, because if we follow him and subscribe, like he said, go listen to the videos on all of his different platforms, not only are you getting tons of hours of free content, but you're really getting a well-rounded view of the big picture, which does, at the end of the day, the goal is to legalize pedophilia, and, to do it right under our noses, and to normalize a lot of these things that the guests on my podcast in particular talk about, that their families were involved in. They're trying to make this mainstream, these horrific, disgusting, deviant acts that they're doing on these children that you guys hear in these testimonies. That's exactly what they want to be normalized in real life, so they can do it without needing to hide. And Jon recognizes that he's way ahead of the curve. I think that's the other thing, Jon. I think your work that you're doing now on all these different platforms is going to be studied for generations to come. I just hope, like you said, more people get on board now before we have, before these laws change under our noses, so we can be ahead of the curve and, and stop it from happening, and be able to lobby for the opposite of what they want. So I really do encourage you guys to go dig into all of Jon's platforms. I'll have them all linked in the show notes for you guys. And like we said, if you guys are looking for a therapist or looking for somebody to guide you through therapy, I highly recommend Jon. I can't recommend him enough. I don't put my stamp and recommendation on many businesses or people, but I definitely put my stamp of approval on Jon, and highly recommend that you guys reach out to him or send his information to somebody if you know of a survivor that's struggling, or somebody that could use his help. Send his link to them. That way they can connect with him. We're always looking for good resources here in the community. So please go connect with him, you guys. I'll have all of his links in the show notes, like I said. I'll have my links as well. Stay up to date with us on all different platforms. John has 2 YouTube channels, which is awesome. Pray over both of them that nothing happens, but we know that there's always that chance. So if you guys also keep in touch on both channels, if something happens to one, you guys can keep in touch with him and he can put updates on the other channel for you guys to catch up with him if and when anything does happen. But I do ask that all of you guys please pray over John as he continues whistleblowing and sharing all of this really crucial information. There's a lot of spiritual warfare, a lot of warfare in general that comes and attacks people that speak out about all of this. So I ask that you guys please pray for John. Please pray for his family and his work, and that he can continue on with the same courage and valor that he's been, and with minimal attacks on him. So John, thank you again so much for coming on. It's an honor having you. Thank you all so much for listening. God bless you all, and we will see you next time.